Hello, and welcome to the Old Farm Bus Podcast. This is the back of the bus session.
Hello and welcome to the Old Farm Bus, Back of the Bus Sessions podcast. Today's guest, I've got a stunning guest on the bus. I'm really excited about this. He's a good friend of mine, but I want to explore your mind, brother. So welcome aboard, Jonesy! Woo, 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 woo. Don't worry, I put a little daft edit of a audience or going mental for you, mate, so don't worry about that.
That's good, I'm glad.
Jonesy, brother,
yeah,
welcome.
Man.
How are you feeling?
I feel good, bro. I'm grateful, man. I'm happy to be here, mate.
Are you ready for some podcast action?
I'm up for a chat, bro.
Yeah.
Definitely, mate. Always happy.
Jonesy, it's hard to know where to start with a guest like you because you've done so much with your life. So where I'd like to start, can we go back to the beginning of your journey? Can I hear about Mini Jonesy?
Sure, man.
Little Jonesy. What? Where did you grow up? What are you doing at this time?
So when you say mini...
0 to 10.
0 to 10. All right then, bro. Okay, my friend. So I guess my story starts in a little suburb in Derby called Spondon, where it was quite a formative place as well. It's interesting when I reflect back to my childhood and I see how like the experiences that I had did have a big impact upon me. There's quite a dramatic kind of dark start, which I'm very comfortable talking about.
Is that okay with you?
Yeah, always.
If there's any territories we go down, just let me know.
There's none at all.
Perfect.
And I think it's really important that people can talk comfortably, or that we as a society can speak about these things openly. Yeah. And it's a common experience, but it is formative. It is a formative experience. And that's that my mother died when I was 3 years old.
Okay.
That had a big impact upon, obviously, the person that I became and the experience that my father would have had and how that kind of generally might have just shaped my upbringing. And there's parts of that experience, obviously, where there's great tragedy involved in this, but there are consequences to that experience which have made me the man that I am today and have kind of like informed, if you like, the kind of paths that I've taken, which really kind of have come to define my entire life in a way. So my mother died of cancer, and then later in life, kind of 6 years ago now, my father died of cancer too. And a lot of people will know me for the work that I do with Praxis Probiotics at the moment, as well as some other kind of the interest that I have in things like holistic health, as well as kind of like broader sort of social change and kind of community development projects and things like this that I'm really passionate about and interested in. So I do believe that despite that kind of, very, very unfortunate kind of experience, and, rest in peace, Mary Jones, my mother, my dear mother, I do look back on that as being a formative experience that actually kind of like led to me hopefully contributing some sort of good in the world as well. But so I thought it would probably be relevant for me to just shine a little light on that because it was such a big
I didn't actually
experience.
know that part of your life, man, and that's filled my heart a little bit. It gives me a good insight to who you are, and it kind of stars align a little more to why you are the way you are, and you do amazing things for the community, man. Like as we said in the car earlier, I think of Derby and my mind goes straight to like good people of Jonesy, like Sophie Sparham, just amazing people in that community, but you bring everyone together, and hearing that part of your story really gives me a bit of sense of, right, this is making sense now why you do this. So when your mum passed away, and you're being raised with your dad then?
Yeah.
And have you got any siblings or anything?
Yes, I've got my brother, Paul, who I love very dearly, who's like 6 years older than me.
Right.
So Paul's going to be approaching 46.
Okay.
And I've got a younger brother. I will be in March,
bro. You look so good. You look so good.
Oh, bless you, man.
Wow.
Well.
You've just blown my mind a little bit. That's crazy. Okay. I'm going to have to sit down for a minute. Oh, thank God I'm sitting down.
Well.
Good on you, lad.
Cheers, man. Thank you, man.
Okay, we're going to get into this later of like the secret. I can't wait.
I didn't even know about this one. 10 pints a night.
Yeah.
20 years. No. Because, that is an interesting twist.
That we'll definitely get into that as well.
No doubt. So I've got my brother Paul, I've got my brother Chris. So I've got a younger brother called Chris. And yeah, we grew up in a household that was obviously on that level, it was kind of broken. I mean, my younger brother Chris, he's like 13 years younger than me, so he wasn't around at the time. He came onto the scene. He slid onto the scene about 10 years later. So it was me and my brother Paul, and we were growing up with my father, and then later my stepmother. And you know, on many levels, interestingly, maybe. Just to think about generally for whoever else this applies to, it was a pretty typical kind of childhood, man. It was very mainstream, very kind of mainstream, suburban, state school, like Finder's crispy pancakes, just frozen food, you know what I mean? Just watching TV.
Kinder eggs?
Kinder eggs. You know, if ever it was time for a treat, say that my brother was allowed to go and like sleep at his mate's house, and that was his treat, and I'm like, oh, you know, Paul's got to go and stay at his mate's house. I was like, what do I get?
Was it a Kinder
And it's like, yo, all right, look, I want a Kinder egg. Yeah, so I'm going to stop at the shop. I want a Kinder egg.
And with nostalgia, mate, 100%.
And it was kind of like, it's interesting because I grew up in the suburbs, man, and there's a lot of things about this society that many people that know me will be aware of that I feel very critical of. There's things about the world, the kind of the period of time that I grew up in, and the society that I grew up in, with an awareness of all of the privileges that I've got, all of the things that I've got to be very grateful about, which I'm aware of. You know, still things that I feel very critical of now. Looking at the world now as it is, and looking back at the world as it was, but also coming to kind of like realize that there was parts of me, things inside of me, I guess my nature, if you like, as a human being, that was craving or wanting or needing more or other things. You know, and whether this is like looking at the ways in which our society was, like our communities were kind of divided a little bit, or not really spending too much time in our natural habitat, like in nature. Or kind of like the way that the schooling system had an impact upon me. I grew up to become very critical of the schooling system. Hence, you know, I spent 10 years as a youth worker from when I left university. So I finished university in 2005. I went to Leeds University, came back to Derby. I was kind of torn. Do I stay in Leeds or do I come back to Derby? I made a very clear decision to come back to Derby for very clear reasons.
Right, okay.
And then Thank
God you did.
Bless you. Not everybody will say that, but I appreciate it. I appreciate that, man.
Good answer.
I appreciate that. But, you know, that's when I became a youth worker. And it was with this awareness that, like, I felt so passionate, actually, about knowledge and about education and about learning. I really didn't necessarily appreciate my schooling experience very much. But I did actually deeply value my university experience, or just the extent to which that kind of like introduced me to the idea that knowledge is power, and we can find
education.
Ideas.
It can be a great tool, great asset to you, but just not necessarily done in which way you've experienced.
And you're the man for this job, of course, man.
Well, mate, I've talked with you before, and I've just thinking all the way, like, how well it worked together as well. I feel like the energy was emanating from both of us. We were like just in flow state, and I think it is because we've had really bad times from the past in the education system and just struggling through, you know, we may have not reciprocated how they wanted to teach. We may have like had our own I'm very creative, but I was known for being a naughty boy, but it's because I didn't want to sit down and just cram and regurgitate information. I can't work like that.
Totally.
And I think we say naughty a lot now, and it's probably just like, no, maybe the wrong approach is being given, is how I feel.
I couldn't agree with you more, my friends. And, you know, I was working at Baby People, which I really appreciated that experience. Working with young people that had been kind of expelled from the schooling system. They'd been sort of labelled as being hard to reach, kind of like difficult, naughty children. And they would come to our space where the way that we related to them was totally different. So they were used to kind of authority figures. They were used to people speaking down to them. Dominant,
powerful.
Yeah, all of this kind of like speaking to them in judgmental, condescending, patronising tones. But then they would come to our space, and we were not. It wasn't that we were kind of just being more respectful. We were trying our best to kind of totally meet them where they were at, and kind of show a real interest and a real commitment to their needs and who they were and what they were about. And it was absolutely beautiful and brilliant. You know this. You know what this is like. Beautiful and brilliant to see the transformation, which can just be instant. You know, like I've met young people that are deemed to be, you know, violent, rude, aggressive. Actually, they're responding in that way. They're behaving in that way because they feel like they're being disrespected and they're being abused and they feel like they're being bullied and they feel like their boundaries are actually being broken by the institution. You show them some respect and you give them some space and you ask them their opinion about stuff and you're going to get some of the most sort of like dignified, respectful, creative, intelligent, decent,
real
conduct that you will ever experience in your life. And some of these young people that I met are some of the best human beings that I've ever met in my entire life. These are some of the young people that they've been oppressed by the system. They've been disrespected. They've been demonized. They've been written off. They've been assumed to never amount to nothing and things like this. And I've seen them, you know, conduct themselves with the greatest moral codes at times, integrity and all of these things, man. But you know, I guess the point is not to go off on one. It's more about like, it's
keep going off on them, mate.
It's interesting. It's interesting what the institutions do towards this sort of thing. So, I guess kind of like tying it back round to where we were. It's like, despite on the surface what was a very middle of the road, very kind of quite comfortable, you know, working class family in the suburbs, though, single parent really for a long period of time. And then just doing the usual stuff, you know, my education about food and nutrition and, you know, what to eat and stuff like this, it came from advertisements on TV. Do you know what I mean?
I do.
Like the bulk of my awareness about what it means to be a human being, to be a kind of a person living in this world as like an adult, I don't really feel like I got a huge amount from kind of like the schooling system and that sort of thing. It either came from like what I would deem to be not particularly appropriate sources, like EastEnders or watching Hollywood films, or, you know, just whatever the kind of culture is surrounding you at a time.
By sort of like gossip stories and so on.
Exactly. Or eventually, fortunately, like hip-hop music, kind of, you know, so it's interesting.
Conscious hip-hop, or
well, you know what,
both.
Totally, mainly, you know, largely I was listening to like Tupac, like Talib Kweli, Mos Def, Gangstar.
I just going a little back, like you were on about scars that you were given in your childhood. Have you been counselled? Have you had a therapist? And have you gone really into your psyche of the past and some of the problems that you've faced? Could I hear any of them, like what that was, and what your dad's approach was in that time to you? I know it's a very layered question, but what the scars were and how you've dealt with them, and if your dad was a help to that.
Totally. So interesting. I find this really fascinating, man, and I could talk about it for hours, but you know, I'll give you whatever you want. It's kind of like
all of it.
I've been in and out of therapy for the last sort of we're coming up to about 10 years. We're coming about 7 years. I would say 7 to 8 years. I'm trying to work out exactly when it was. About 2012 when I first went into therapy.
Is that the same therapist?
No, it's been. There was a period of there's been about 4 therapists. And I voluntarily approached a therapist, and because I've always had such a passion. When I went to university, so I'm trying to find the beginning of all of this. So basically, when I was about 17 years old, I really had my heart broken, like common experience, you know what I mean? I was feeling depressed because of an experience that I'd had at the time as a 17-year-old. And that's when I kind of got into like self-help books, man. Because I'm into like self-help books. And I read a book by Anthony Robbins called Awaken the Giant Within, right?
Sure.
And I was quite young and quite naive, but as somebody that had been through the schooling system and felt that the schooling system had been really inadequate at actually preparing me for the world around me, and that the lessons that I was sitting in and being told to shut up and be quiet in, they weren't really kind of very helpful. And then to hit this kind of like brick wall of depression, of heartbreak, not really being prepared for it by the elders in my community or by my own parent or by the school system, feeling a bit of desperation and confusion, you know. I found myself just kind of like going to the library one day, actually, and I was just desperate actually, and I was looking on the shelves and I was trying to find. That's where my passion for psychology came. So I developed a real passion for psychology and child development and human development generally. And then that passion for psychology, it kind of broadened into a general passion for the human sciences, which includes like sociology, anthropology, even political science, and all of these things. Like generally, I'm interested in the phenomena of what it means to be a human being. Do you know what I'm saying?
Human experience.
The human condition, the human experience, and what that's all about. And I guess I'm really passionate about sociology, and to me, that's really relevant. Like not just focusing on the individual human being and what it means to be a human being with a psyche, a holistic human being.
Sure.
Consciousness, spirit, however we can consider and conceptualize these things.
Yeah.
But the impact...
like the ego, a character.
Totally, all of these things. But also the impact that our environment has on us as well.
Right, okay.
And by environment, I don't just sort of mean, like I was talking about, growing up in Spondon, a suburb, or, you know, whether you're growing up in a rural place or depending on what schools you go to or whatever. But I mean the sort of like the time in history that you're born, part of the world that you're born, like what is your culture like? How does this totally shape and define what it means to be a human? Because you can get a human being that's born on this side of the world, and then a human being that's born on this side of the world 1,000 years apart, and it's almost like they're totally different species, animal, mammal. Do you know what I mean? Like so different beliefs, different values, different outlooks, all of which have been influenced and shaped by their environment and that kind of thing. So I cultivated this sort of like interest in psychology anyway. That led to me studying sociology at university. I was passionate about education for the reasons that we touched upon. That made me want to learn more about pedagogy. So, you know, of course, you know, the study of learning, I guess, and how we learn most effectively. That's something I've been really passionate about in my adult life. But along with that came this kind of like interest in me. Why am I like this then? Right. So, all right, then, if I'm interested in this and I'm interested in these things and I'm interested in what have I got to refer to when it comes to thinking about these things? Well, I've got me, I've got my experience. So why am I the way that I am? Why do I behave in this situation like this? Not everybody does. So why is it that I do, but other people don't? And then learning more about, well, I'm sure that mum dying when I was younger, that must have had an impact on me. Yeah. So I started to study things like attachment theory, like John Bowlby, like attachment theory, looking at the impact that a child in its most formative stages of development upon being impacted upon by the loss.
How would that be, that most formative age? What do they say? Is it 0 to...
I'm not entirely sure, but I think different parts of what would generally be deemed as highly formative period of development, at different stages on that timeline, it will be more accentuated, the ways in which you'll be impacted upon. Some people will say that like 0 to 2, for example, would be very significant for this aspect of development, if you like. But we can look at like 3 to 6 as being like very formative for different aspects of our development. So whether that's to do with the way that we create relationships with people, friendships with people, our overall perception or outlook on the world, like, is impacted upon by these things. So the idea, for example, of like, say in my instance, and quite a common instance actually, it could have been other people might experience this in very different ways. Some people might be neglected or abused or abandoned or rejected in various different ways, and it will have a similar impact potentially upon how somebody might grow up to relate to the world. And there's really interesting correlations here with kind of, so we're talking about attachment theory. This is the field that we're looking at, attachment theory. And then there's very commonly spoken about relationships between our attachments as people and phenomena that we experience usually in adult life, like addiction. So this is the sort of stuff that I know that you're... totally. So people like, you know, Russell Brand will talk about these things. He's done great interviews with people like Gabor Mate, who's an addiction specialist, who
Do you have Audible?
Yeah.
Yeah, I listen to them on there. There's some great podcasts on that.
Wicked, man. Totally. And this is, without going on too much about this stuff, this is stuff that I find really interesting in, and I've been wise to try and learn about. And as a part of my process going through therapy, I've learned more about the ways in which I personally behave under certain circumstances as a result of losing my mother at a very, very formative age. And the kind of like the need for me to learn how to better kind of like regulate my emotions at times, my nervous system. Like I can be really hypervigilant. I can feel really insecure. I can, various things that I've struggled with, mainly in the earlier stages of adulthood. So from the ages of about 17 up until the latter part of my 20s, these were things that I was really grappling with and trying to get to grips with and learn more about. And it kind of accompanied a real sensitivity that led me to find myself being really easily affected by how what people thought of me, or how I felt I was being treated by people, or to what extent I felt like I belonged or was accepted or loved by other people and things like this.
Yeah.
My ego is obviously totally bound up in all of this, but it's totally natural as a result of having insecure attachments. The reason why I've got insecure attachments is because as a 3-year-old, I lost my mother.
Yeah.
And as a 3-year-old, I didn't understand death.
Right.
Don't know what death is. All I know is that this woman, who is my universe, who I totally depend upon for all of my nourishment, she's not here anymore. Where is she? She'll be back soon. Yeah? Where is she? Where is she? And then over time, obviously I can't remember what that experience was like. It's deeply repressed. But, I'm aware.
Deep subconscious probably.
Subconscious shit, man. There's a whole like volcano of emotions that are bound up in this, which as an adult, I still have to untangle at times, to do with things like I have to sometimes, I've had to work really hard at trying to develop the self-awareness needed. I'm still highly flawed and I've got a long way to go, of course, I really have, but I'm committed to the path. And it's fascinating and it's important because it affects so many people.
Sorry, on that path as well, do you think there is ever an end destination where, I figured it out now, I'm sorted? Or do you think it's just always going to be ongoing and you're going to have to, a knot might appear and you've just got to like rub it out a little bit and take that knot away? Do you think knots will just keep occurring because you've come from a broken experience in essence? Is that a term you like to hear either, like broken experience? But
I don't mind.
And also, have you going deeper into self and going into that introspective part of your life, have you managed to really help others through this? Because like you say, I always say I'm not an expert in anything apart from an expert in myself. I've got an expert on what I've experienced and how I've dealt with it, and through that hopefully I can help others. Have you had that, or do you feel just becoming that self, learning that self, it's all just for self?
No, man, on a level, I genuinely think it's really important that we kind of engage each other and the wider society in these issues. I'm glad that these things are less taboo. I love the fact that you asked me this question and I was able to talk about it without feeling like it's got to be awkward. I think that's what we need. We need to be able to kind of like discuss more what it means to be human. And I did like about 10, 11 years worth of quite intensive youth work, where I was working in different organisations with different young people, usually from what are deemed to be quite challenging backgrounds. And I felt like a real empathy, man, like a very real sense of commitment and affinity and solidarity with the people that I was working with. A lot of young people that have been through very difficult experiences themselves. They might be either highly anxious people, really angry people, or just totally introverted or extroverted. How their trauma, because this is what we're talking about now, this is all about childhood trauma. The way that childhood trauma kind of manifests itself might vary from one person to another. But what on the surface we might look at as somebody who's being this way or this way or this way, without always trying to understand the reasons behind it, has come from a place of, you know, potential real suffering, like real difficulty. And it has certainly allowed me to feel better able to relate with some of the young people that I've worked with over the years. But also, since doing the youth work as well, I guess, like yourself, I've always been passionate about about expressing myself lyrically. I'm a man of words, I guess, you know, to many people's dismay at times. You know, I can go on, man. But like,
it's great.
The way it is, I think there's something, it's also I'll quickly say, a significant strand of my therapy has actually been writing therapy, creative writing therapy, obviously talking therapies. These are things that kind of I find supports my own healing and my ability to be soothed and that kind of thing. But doing lyric writing workshops for people, really working with young people, try and help them feel that it's okay to talk about the things that they might not usually feel it's okay to talk about, whatever that is, their pain, their anger, their hatred, their love, whatever feelings that they're experiencing, by them being able to be given permission to actually kind of like experiment with expressing those feelings. The more aware that they'll be able to become, the more in control that they'll be able to become, the more that they'll be able to identify things as they're happening and kind of like make better decisions, I guess, and have more self-love, self-compassion, self-understanding, and for others too. Do you know what I mean? The more that we can understand about ourselves, potentially, the easier it is to understand others. You know what I mean? I've been struggling with various things this year. To do with like feeling hurt. We all get hurt at times, betrayed, burnt, and self-righteous with it. You know what I mean? And I can be really self-righteous, man. I'm one of the most self-righteous people that I've ever met. Like at times,
I've ever met.
You know, like on a level, and I look at it, on a level, man. And there's times when I kind of like, I feel like I remember at the time feeling that it was so important. It was like I was so in the right and they were so in the wrong. Do you know what I mean? And it's just a major injustice. But then I have to remind myself, but I've also done that to other people. Or, but I've also made that mistake too. Or, I've been there too. Do you know what I mean? And on a spiritual path, I think for me, there's various spiritual ambitions I have, which are things to do with like compassion and forgiveness and trying to kind of let go a little bit, try and become less controlling of the outcomes I'm working towards.
Right, okay.
Trying to have like less high expectations of the people that I spend time with or whatever it is. There's various flaws that I've got as a human being that are bound up in some of these experiences. There's a really interesting thing about when somebody's had their world rocked at a very young age and they've suffered as a result of that fact. So they might have like had to experience great trauma because something changed rapidly, like unexpectedly in their world, like their mother just disappeared. They didn't understand death, so that was to quick wrap that point up. Like, you don't understand death, so as far as you are concerned, she's just gone and she's not come back. So that leads to like certain ruminations or reflections or kind of subconscious kind of like beliefs being formed to do with whether or not you've been abandoned. Have I been abandoned? Have I been rejected? Is it because I'm unlovable? There's all of these things that people tend to tussle with upon having that kind of experience. So you've got to try and like work with those emotions and realize that these are feelings that get a vote.
So could I say then, do you know how you had that abandonment issue feeling? So when you really broke down 17, 18 was it a breakup, you say? Was that highly because you felt that as a really young person? Because a lot of my friends that have had breakups, they don't do well with them, but in 2 or 3 weeks they're pretty much over it and they're just moving on, chilling out, other girls. I had abandonment issues, and again it was months and months of pain that I had to endure. Is that a big thing for us? Is we want love in all these places, we're desperate, we're seeking for love, and when we get it, it's the most powerful thing. And when somebody chooses to be away from you and no, I don't want you anymore, it just comes crashing down. Is that huge?
Totally, man.
Is it?
Yeah, totally empathise with this. And I've had this conversation with various young people that I've met in the past where they've had an experience like this. I've got a few that stick in my mind, and other friends. Ultimately, there's many of us. You know what I mean? Of course, there's many of us, man. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, we're on it together.
And
we're on the journey.
And it's very interesting because I've had interesting conversations with therapist friends of mine, not my therapists, but therapists that are friends of mine.
Sure.
Talking about almost like you've got people that we might say have like secure attachments. They might have grown up. It's, you know, everyone's got their own unique struggles.
Yeah.
But when we look at attachment theory, you might have like anxious attachments and insecure attachments, and then like what we call secure attachments. And that's just the idea that maybe somebody has grown up and they've actually felt really secure, really supported. Things have been quite stable or relatively stable.
Yeah.
And they've grown up. All of their needs have been met largely. You know, we're talking about a situation where because their needs have been met adequately growing up, and they've not had their world rocked in whatever ways it might be. And it doesn't have to be the loss of a parent. It could be in other ways. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Just rocking the boat.
And so it can lead to this sort of anxiety that people might feel. Or so what I'm getting at, what I'm trying to say is that for some of us, we break up, say if we're talking about intimate relationships, then yeah. So if somebody breaks up in an intimate relationship, to some people they can be just really chilled out about it, kind of cool about it. Oh well, never mind, and then we just, like, life goes on. You just crack on.
Which I've never been able to understand because I have such a polar existence to that.
Yeah.
I'm like, how are you dealing with this like that?
It's really interesting, man. And I can't speak on behalf of everybody, obviously. I've only got my own experience.
Yeah.
And the stuff that I've read about, there's a really good book that's quite a popular book, but it's thought of as being quite well respected in the academic circles. And it's, I believe, called Attached. It's Attached, and it's quite a practical, almost like self-help book about understanding your attachment style and how you can work with it to improve your relationships with, you know, friends and lovers and whoever. Do you know what I mean? But I think that there are some of us, maybe we might place a disproportionate amount of value on one specific relationship than maybe is wise for us to do so. So when that relationship gets affected or we lose it, it can feel like the end of the world. It can feel as though somebody has died. It can feel as though we have lost somebody, to the extent that somebody has actually died or we've lost them from our life in a really quite extreme way. Whereas when we've got healthier attachments, maybe, and this might be something that we can just build over time, and trying to lead more balanced lives, and we find our sense of fulfillment coming from different sources, and our sense of value, our sense of self-worth and things like that, not just coming from how attractive we might feel in the eyes of other people, or how loved we might feel in the eyes of other people or another person or a significant primary person, but actually from ourselves and from the work that we do, from the way that we treat our community, the other important things that we do with our existence. The more that we can lead a more rounded, wholesome, balanced life, the
listening
better.
To what you said, like, people of any age, like, if you're going through an existence where it's quite painful, you're struggling in many ways, you keep hitting a brick wall or making the same mistakes, it's integral, what I'm hearing, is to go into what you might have been through as a child and look into your past and learn from it. Because a lot of people I know who are struggling, and they're like, I keep on doing this, or I keep on going for the wrong type, or I keep on making the wrong relationships with even friends and family or whatever. Maybe just look at who you are, though. Instead of looking on the outside all the time and the outside, look inside and go, why do I attract this? Why does this come into my life? And what is it a part of my psyche, and what can I work on? Is that quite accurate?
Oh, I think it's wise, man.
Well,
I think it's wise.
I'm learning from you right now, mate.
Well,
this
man,
is just off the cuff.
I think that the more that we can try and understand who we are, you know, with real insight, including our shadows, like the parts of ourselves that we might not like, or the parts of ourselves that might have shown up in ways that have hurt other people, oppressed other people, controlled other people, the ways in which we might have blamed other people, guilt-tripped people, like all of these ways in which our pain from our past can erupt or bubble up or just show up and manifest itself in ways that aren't desirable. They're not in line with who we are, who we want to be, our values, our beliefs, our ideals. You know what I mean? These are things that we need to learn about. We need to really learn about why is it that I did that. Like, I'm trying to reflect on these things all of the time. Despite the fact that I've been thinking about these things for a while, they still occur.
Yeah.
What I feel pleased about, and I think it gives hope to people, is that they happen increasingly less. My desire to reduce the amount that they occur, or my desire to be able to better regulate my own behavior in the light of these emotions or feelings or whatever it is when they do occur. So my ability to control myself or regulate my emotions better, or basically there's something important about being able to like self-soothe.
Yeah.
And the less problems that end up occurring, the stronger my motivation actually, as time passes, my motivation to continue treading this path and getting better at being who I want to be.
Yeah.
Like, my motivation for that only increases. I have noticed. I find it increasingly more important, increasingly more interesting, fascinating. And I just understand that there's benefits for obviously everybody. It's for myself, and it is for the people around me, and it's for the wider community. And to me, this is some of the most important stuff as a society, whether we care about personal growth, holistic healing, like recovery. These are some of the key things I'm passionate about, or broader sort of societal change. I think there is a relevance to the perspective of working with yourself. I don't think it's the full picture, far from it. I will usually be quick to talk about collective action, people getting organised, radical social change.
This is like the Russell Brand book. Do you know, have you read Mentors?
No, I haven't. I've heard parts of it. I listened to parts of it.
Just picking the right people, like let's say Gandhi promoted be the change you want to see, so go inside and change the outside, but then picking all different philosophers, so then if you want to change this part of your life, look at this. And I reckon what you spoke about then is a very Gandhi-esque vibe that I'm picking up. It's got a lovely attitude towards it. Gandhi just simplified it in a couple of sentences.
Word up, man. Thank goodness for Gandhi.
I love what you're about, man. And just going into the writing aspect, so you embody this, everything you're talking about now. Every time I meet you, it doesn't matter what, that's the feeling I get from it. You're bettering yourself, you're trying to better people around you by just being. You go into schools and colleges and places to teach this and get them into writing because you think that's a great platform to do it and a cathartic tool. Who give you that tool? Who did you go to where they said, you know what, Jonesy, you say a lot, you've got all these ideas, try getting it on some paper?
It's really interesting, man. To be honest with you, mate, it's something that's been sadly quite lacking from my life, and that's usually not the kind of thing that I really speak to anybody about other than my therapist. It's an interesting thing that therapists have documented, the idea that a lot of us come to do and teach and give the things that we feel that we're actually in most need of actually being given ourselves. You know what I mean? I wish I've not really had many people in my life growing up where I was kind of like encouraged or had people believe in me and things like this, or encouraged me to participate in these types of empowering activities. I had some really good friends though, you know what I mean? And I feel grateful for that. I feel that for me, the bulk of the processes of empowerment I've been through like this, whether it's like creative writing and this sort of stuff, like rapping back in the day, started out rapping with my friend Alex Blood, and a little crew of us that were kind of just into that at the time. These were sorts of things that we were just doing to pass time on Saturday nights and stood outside the kebab shop at the precinct and things like this. But we felt so strongly about what had happened. You know, we were getting our education from listening to Tupac and Gang Starr and all these sort of like, you know, I was learning about American politics. I knew more about American politics and social injustices and things like this from listening to hip hop than I knew about the politics in the country that I lived from watching the news or something like that. Do you know what I mean? But I've not really been through a lot of the things that I do in my days, with my time, with my life, my passions that I've pursued and things like this. A lot of the things that I've done I've been kind of like, not, it would be inaccurate to say self-taught, because of course, like, we're always
You've had
learning collectively from other people, and we're kind of always learning from each other and that sort of thing. But they've been like collectively taught. It's not been as a part of a course that I went on or whatever it was like that. So these are things that I've picked up out of passion because I've understood or I've believed in the importance of teaching myself how to try certain things or do certain things.
I heard in a song recently, somebody said poetry came to me, and it made me really reflect, because I felt that, like, I'm again somebody that not just self-taught, but I was told dyslexic at school. I got laughed at once, and I remember that just stopped me writing. I hated writing from that moment. I was like, I'm not going near that. People laugh at you when you do that, but not in a nice way. And then again, I lost a friend. I had some bad things happen in my life, and I thought, fuck it. I'm picking up that pen, I'm getting a book, and I'm just going to write it out. And it was like a superpower.
Yeah.
But it came in that moment. And that's why it made me so thirsty for it, though, because I discovered it for myself for the first time and not being pushed down a path or told you should do this or you should do that. I wanted it. And then that sent me on my path from there. So did you feel that burning from that? Yeah,
totally, bro. Like, I do have very fond memories of being like a 17-year-old boy who, up to that point, had been kind of maybe feeling a bit uninspired with life or whatever. Do you know what I mean? But then I'd been listening to some kind of like conscious and political hip hop.
Yeah.
And I've been feeling inspired by just this idea that there's people telling the truth, man. You know what I mean? I'm like, teachers aren't telling the truth.
I had that from Russell Brand.
Politicians aren't telling the truth.
Somebody saying there is another way.
You don't
have to just go on this mainstream line.
Totally.
Have you thought about this?
Exactly, mate. Exactly. That's it. And I think and it says a lot about the state of the society that we're growing up in, when all it takes is somebody telling the truth for you to have your life changed. You know what I mean? It should be the norm. It should be the standard. I guess back in the day as well, it's interesting. I feel like we're kind of blessed these days that we've got access to podcasts. And where we can find people that are committed to talking about things honestly and insightfully. Back in the day, I was dealing with like 5 channels on a TV or the radio, and it's all, it was all mainstream media in a sense of being, corporate owned, corporate controlled propaganda, not to be too kind of like strong with it, but it kind of ultimately was very, very, very limited and not particularly representative of reality.
When you reflect back, was it like the way you depict it? Like, can you remember, have you seen the film Pleasantville? It's a great film, isn't it?
Yeah.
But like pretty much expresses that conditioning and be like this, and then colour gets introduced throughout the film when they start thinking for themselves again, and art becomes a topic, and they have their own perspectives on it, not being told how to think.
Totally, man.
Was your world, because I'm a bit younger than you, but was it back then? Did you? Which I had no idea about. I thought you were about my age, 5 but was it quite in that black and white look to it, if that makes sense?
Well, I mean, I guess the film's a metaphor, and saying black and white's like a metaphor, but it's certainly, when I look back now, right, and it is interesting to try and remind oneself that, 1990 is different to 2020. The years fly by, and before you know it, you're like, oh shit, I've just realised that things are actually different now. Do you know what I mean? But it was very much a case of where my perception of the world came from was either the television, the front page of a tabloid newspaper, or magazines that I was reading in that were on the shelves of the newsagent, or from the schooling system, or conversations with other people around me. But adults weren't, the kind of adults in my life, all of the love in the world to them, they weren't really talking to us about important things. In fact, there was this sort of like kind of toxic kind of sentiment that I know is actually quite common in a lot of families and stuff like that, is that we don't talk about religion or politics or whatever it is, around the dinner table or whatever. It's not like, we'd sit around dinner table and then people will be talking about, what's going down in the world and what we should be doing to organise and make a difference. I'm glad that there are families out there that do talk about important things and honest things. And, I think there's something really important about that within families, that we can have appropriate, open conversations with each other about what matters. Put it simply like that. But it wasn't really like that where I was growing up, you see. So upon
that's
feeling the odd truth bomb come out of the speaker or the headphone, I mean, one of the first tapes I got into, I was 16 years old, I was on my paper round. The road that I lived on in Spondon on Sandringham Drive, at the top of that was a top shop, and I got my first sort of paper round. It was like £1 a day, like hour and a half. Got up at 6 a.m, did my paper round, and I was well into basketball at the time. That's been like the main sport that I've ever loved passionately. I wasn't really into hip hop at the time though. I was mainly just a massive Michael Jackson fan. But then I got really into like the Levelers and kind of Pearl Jam, Nirvana, some sort of like grungy kind of like rock and indie bands and punk bits which they started to give me this political education that I'm talking about.
So music took over your life in this time.
It started to kind of like resonate with me more because I was with the Levelers, for example, even though that's old school back in the day business, man, hats off to the Levelers and credit where due. They had a real skill to talk about freedom, right? Freedom in ways that really evoked the free spirit in all of us. Really kind of like strong sense of kind of community, connection, being with people, away from the crap, away from oppression, away from the hustle and the bustle, but whilst also dealing with like big political issues, right? So my passion in music, and this is why I'm into spoken word and everything like that, it was always more to do with the lyrics. It was always, for me, it was always about the lyrics. Lyrics first. The actual music always came after, right? So it was kind of like Michael Jackson. There were certain tunes from Jacko growing up that do resonate strongly with a 10-year-old or an 11-year-old or a 12-year-old, which was the age that I was, you know what I mean? I ain't got no shame in saying that I was like listening to like Man in the Mirror or whatever it was by Michael Jackson.
That is literally the song
and feeling like, fuck yeah. Go on Jacko, man. Here we go.
Oh, what a guy.
On a level. So, you know, that's where my kind of like...
Got goosebumps then, thinking of that.
And then I kind of arrived at hip hop because that's where I found this sort of... I was feeling more angry. I was starting to feel more passionate and committed to really wanting to make a difference. I felt absolutely outraged by some of the things I was learning about surrounding significant social injustices, things to do with brutality and poverty and oppression and things like this. And I was listening to people talk about these things. Obviously, I wasn't very well educated at the time about the details of what was going on. But it was the importance of the art form, the craft.
They planted a seed.
You know, the energy, the passion, the intensity, and the kind of like the hope that there's people out there that are saying, nah, fuck this. We're going to make a difference. And that was evidently clearly lacking from my existence. And I needed that.
Or mainly, you say American hip hop, was it?
Largely. But
underground.
A few years later, me and Alex Blood, we were performing with a crew around Derby called Deprogrammed, and I should give a shout out to my man Gelport and my man Frias, Michael Frias, and we was in like a crew, and we ended up actually we dropped an EP. There's hip hop heads in Derby. If they're listening to that, they'll know what I'm talking about. It was a thing,
Wicked,
I don't want to like overdo it, but it was a thing. And we dropped an EP called Spare a Little Change.
Okay.
And we ended up touring all over the country. So we were touring with people like Jest, Task Force, like Rodney P, some big names, man. We shared the stage with like some quite big names like Skinny Man, other people that were.
So glad I got you on, dude. I'm really enjoying this part of you because I didn't know. Yeah,
totally, man. It was like, 17, 18, 19. This was just before I went to university in like 2001. I was in Leeds for 4 years at Uni Dem. Me and Blood were working on these bits with the rest of the crew. And then I was quite active. I was never the best MC, and that's cool. I can live with that. I'm happy with my lyrics. But do you know what I mean? I was never the best MC. But I was quite proactive at the time. I guess I felt quite inspired, and I was up for doing a bit of moving and shaking. So I was contacting promoters, and I was trying to get gigs and stuff like this. So, this was like 2001, 2002, 2003. We was performing in Sheffield, Hull, Birmingham, London, just doing the rounds really. But kind of like felt like was blagging it a little bit because, sharing stages with particularly I guess people like Jest, who's such an incredible rapper and lyricist, and like Task Force and people like Skinny Man and Brain Tax, like these were artists that we were looking up to at the time. So there was you just asked me the question, was it all American? Largely, my formative hip hop inspiration came from Tupac, Gang Starr, Talib Kweli, Public Enemy, a lot of these kind of old school, quite conscious sort of peeps, and a whole list of others, man. Do you know what I mean?
I can hear it now in like knowing the Jonesy I've seen perform and I've seen on stages. I'm understanding like the lyricism, the delivery, the style, like the influences that have been in your life. It makes a lot of sense. That fast pace, let's fucking do it. Like I can see where it's come from, man. Yeah, it's beautiful.
Bless you, man.
So, like, are you continuing to create now? Are you still on that mission? Or have you put your energy in other places? Because you seem to spread it out, dude. Like, you're doing so much. Can you just spin plates all over the place? Or do you try and just put your energy in certain places?
Well, I guess to be honest, and I say this, I'm not hating on myself. I do say it with a level of humility, but just trying to be honest. Like, I do spread myself thin. And I've never been particularly consistent as an artist or with a lot of the things that I've done. And I think, although I might like to have been a little bit more kind of focused maybe or consistent with my kind of like work ethic with regard to certain hobbies and interests and activities and passions and pursuits and things like that, I have actually always dedicated my energy where I felt like it was needed the most in a way.
Okay.
So the bulk of my sort of creative output, if I'm honest with you, it's always been as a part of the work that I've done with youth projects and sort of community development projects and stuff like that. So I feel genuinely, and it's all right, you know, it's okay to big ourselves up a little bit. Like, I feel quite proud of some of the projects that I've done in the last sort of like 10, 15 years.
I'm glad you're proud of that, man.
I am, man.
I'm glad you've established that.
Yeah, totally.
I hate it when people downplay themselves all the time. You're like, please just take this, like, time to appreciate self.
Word up. And I don't want to go into it too. I don't want to start naming too many names, but I'm on about doing projects with some of the biggest if I was to ask, if listeners were listening and I said to who do you think are the biggest names, like some of the most significant hip-hop and grime MCs in the city, right, Derby, and able to write a long list. I'm talking about, I'll be able to tick quite a few of the names on that list, right, of people that I was working with on these projects when they were much younger. Do you know what I mean? When they were like much younger. I ain't saying that I can take no credit for what they've achieved at all or anything like that, because I'm not on that flex at all. It's more about understanding that as a community we've all been working together, and as a part of these different projects that we participate in together collectively and things like that, we do gain strength and wisdom and empowerment and confidence and sort of encouragement from them. And it gives us a little boost to continue down the paths that we can continue down. But these sort of like youth and community development projects, these sort of like global action projects and things that were to do with social change and social justice, and most of the youth work that I've done has always been about how can we as a group make a difference where we live, right? So it'd often be people coming together. So it might be me and a group of MCs, you know, that are now like men in the community that are doing their thing and they're doing it well. They're doing it successfully. Yeah, people that I got the utmost respect for. They might have been 20 at the time, 16 at the time, 25 at the time, whatever it might have been. Yeah. And now they're like, you know, they're doing their bits big time. But we were coming together on a Saturday morning or whenever it would have been, putting the kettle on, sitting down and talking together, you know, like, what are the issues we care about? What are the problems that exist in our communities? What are the things that matter more than anything else? What can we do together to make a difference? How can we raise awareness about this problem? How can we encourage people to consider solutions? How can we make a real difference with what we have to offer? And then people are making tunes, man, big tunes. Like, we were organising big events in the community and we were, you know, performing to people facilitating workshops with people and shotting CDs out and about, which were just dope. Like they were really, really, really good. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
and I feel I have very
the shift.
So, you know, a lot of the energy, a lot of my creative energy back in the day was always channeled into these sorts of projects. But now that I'm not really doing the kind of youth and community work that I was doing then anymore, there has been a shift in direction. I have been writing little bits, but it's been so little because the bulk of my energy in this last couple of years has been taken up with very specific projects that have been quite big projects. So, as you know, man, I won't dive into it until you're ready. But
I'm ready, man. I'm bloody ready. Let's plunge.
I quit drinking a couple of years ago, and that's again totally bound up in all of this stuff to do with my journey with my mother dying, growing up as a person, learning more about myself, looking at my attachment issues, the voids within me that I was trying to fill. How can I fill these voids within me? As a result of not having a mother growing up, if she would have been there would have been a whole load of love that I would have received.
Yeah.
That as a result of her not being there, I didn't receive.
Yeah.
Right. And that kind of that helps to explain a little bit how a person can kind of end up growing up almost, if you like, not quite as nourished as they should have been. Yeah.
Seeing where that thorn's come from.
And see how that can lend to them, lead them to becoming sort of like looking for it elsewhere.
Yeah.
In ways that aren't wise or ways that aren't healthy. And that could just be putting all of your eggs in one basket, for want of a better kind of metaphor. Do you know what I mean? What we touched upon earlier
Feeling
of like
addiction to love, addiction to substance, just putting it there and doing it fully.
Totally, man. Rather than kind of like, you know, asking wiser questions to do with needs and how can I nourish my needs as a human being, and what are my needs? And that's where like I've been really enjoying learning more about like holistic health, what it means to be a human being with a whole array of different needs that are important to be met in order for us to feel full, in order for us to feel whole, in order for us to feel happy. Do you know what I mean? On these levels. And upon sort of like developing this problematic relationship with alcohol, where I was just drinking every single day.
Was it just alcohol or was it other substances?
It was mainly alcohol on a level.
Alcohol.
It was mainly it was booze and fags largely. At a weekend, if I found myself in a house party, there could be other things in the mix as well. Do you know what I mean? Just whatever's put in front of me, if I'm honest with you.
But alcohol was the big crux of that.
I think so, man. I think so. So rather than just going off on it now, so when it came to realizing I went through a lot of it. So my father died. That kind of accentuated my drinking. I just set up Praxis Probiotics, which is the kind of workers cooperative that I'm now facilitating with other people, which takes up the bulk of my time, which I'm very happy about because it's the thing that I feel most passionate about. I think it's the thing that I'm currently a part of, which has the potential to make the biggest impact. I feel like it's the thing that's most relevant because it aims to contribute to addressing the biggest crises that we're facing as a species at the moment. And in my view, that's kind of like the environmental crisis, the health crisis. There's a major health crisis. COVID-19 adds a layer on top of that, but there was already a chronic health crisis in 2019. Do you know what I mean?
Has COVID-19 sort of just put light on that as well? Have people started opening their eyes a little more to that crisis that there was already existence? I
think for some people it has contributed to raising awareness about what was already a significant chronic health crisis. But then also now, you know, before COVID, we were already experiencing a significant loneliness crisis, isolation crisis, a crisis of disconnection, if you like. Communities that were divided in various different ways. And the real need for us to be trying to think of ways in which we could bring people together, cultivate connections, help rebuild various different sort of like relationships and sort of like support networks within our communities. And that's something that with lockdown measures and COVID-19 and various different things that have been experienced in 2020, I feel like there's an increasing need for us to be creatively exploring the ways in which we can rebuild our connections with each other, whether that's online or offline. So the bulk of my energy has gone into Praxis Probiotics, and that's where it is at the moment. But there's a bigger picture that I kind of work with. I have like a kind of broader, more nuanced vision for the ways in which I'm trying to lead my life, like reasonably humbly, but with purpose, man. You know, and it's one of the biggest things that I've always felt in my life. I've always felt that, you know, having a strong sense of purpose is like the key to leading a fulfilling, meaningful existence. And when I decided I was going to quit drinking, I don't tend to do things by halves. I might not do things particularly well, but I'm definitely going to be ambitious in terms of how I go about it, based on my own humble standards, you know what I mean? And I thought, well, if I'm going to quit drinking, I need some good to come out of it, as much good to come out of it as possible, not just for myself and my personal relationships, the idea that I quit drinking, but there's got to be a project here. There's got to be
fill this gap.
I've got to make the most of this. So what can I do? And I thought, well, it's a great opportunity to learn as much as I possibly can about recovery, and I'll write a book. So I thought I'll write a book, but it's more than just writing a book. That was just an idea that I just floated above me just to keep me moving, or it gave me something that I could potentially visit at some point. But if I don't have that in my mind as I'm going through this experience, then I might miss certain things or forget certain things or whatever it is. So if I have this intention of potentially writing a book that's helpful, that
you might not deviate off course a little.
Yes, absolutely, man, and it can be helpful on those levels. So I thought, right, I'm going to write a book about this, but I want it to be a helpful book, you know what I mean? Something that can help raise awareness, inspire people, be useful, because I am a passionate reader. I'm a very, very passionate reader, and books have changed my life. So this thing that I touched upon earlier about, like, I've not necessarily had loads of role models around me and people that have been really encouraging or that kind of thing, but my life has been significantly transformed by various authors and people that, or people whose ideas I've learnt about as a result of reading books. But it didn't have to be a book. It could have been an audio book. It could have been a documentary. It could have been a podcast. It could be anything, you know. It's just about knowledge again. Like I've got a real passion for knowledge, you know what I mean? So I thought, So since 2018, because that's when I kind of like quit drinking, and the bulk of that year was me going on this kind of, it was quite a multifaceted sort of healing journey. Back then, I would advocate this to anybody that's interested in sobriety at all. I didn't have the intention or set the goal of quitting for good. Instead, I just set myself the challenge of like quitting for a year. So I thought, right, I'm going to stop drinking for 1 year, which to me is a big deal at the time, because I was a raging pisshead. Most people that knew me knew that I was a serious drinker, man. Do you know what I mean? I was always
passion in it.
Absolutely, man. I wasn't doing things by half. I had a big hole to fill, and I was filling it. So I was approaching it with the aim of doing a year and just learning as much as I could over the course of that year about how to quit for a year. And I thought I'll raise some money. So I got sponsored. I raised quite a bit of cash for a really good project called Active Cancer Therapy Support. So the idea, in a way, man, it was almost like in honour of my parents, if you like. Because when my father died, I was already an alcoholic then, right? But then upon him passing away, my drinking increased. And I was kind of starting to feel increasingly hypocritical. I was just feeling like, what am I doing, man? Like, my mother died of cancer back in the day. My father's died of cancer. I've just set up Praxis Probiotics, which was inspired to think about probiotics and learning more about gut health and the relevance of probiotics and the microbiome and all of this stuff that I'm interested in, which is relevant to Praxis Probiotics. That was kind of like inspired and came as a result of the experience of my father dying. Do you know what I mean? Of cancer. But then at the same time that I'm doing that, my drinking's going through the roof, and it just felt like these things don't fit, man. There's a major conflict here.
Totally get you.
So in terms of the creativity, it kind of got put on hold a little bit, which is ironic because I think that it absolutely wholeheartedly could and should be considered as a significant part of a recovery protocol. Like, you know, I think that creative writing, in fact, my dear friend Jamie Grattan, and I know that Sophie and Fraz, like Jamie Thrazavulu, and other people that have kind of like used creative writing, obviously yourself and many of us, I know in our community, you know, we use writing for therapy and for healing.
Work for us,
you know,
we can help it work for others.
Totally. But what I was doing was I was exploring lots and different approaches towards healing, and writing was a significant part of it, but it was largely journaling. It was largely me just reflecting upon what I was doing and what I was learning as I was doing it, and expressing my emotions and things like that as I was going through it and that kind of thing.
Right.
But I got to a point this year, man, with what was going on with lockdown and COVID and everything that was going down with this. And I started to put pen to paper a little bit more, just now and again, just a little bit more consistently. And I really, really enjoyed it. And I started to kind of like feel as though the new me, the part of me that's sober, because the year passed, you know, the year of sobriety came and passed, and I didn't start drinking again. I continued on my path, and I couldn't imagine going back now, you know.
Did you have to realign a new goal, or did you just go, no, I've done now? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
You did a year, and then that year came up. Did you go, right, I'm going to do 5 years, or have you just gone, no, I'm ready to stop now?
Yeah, it's really interesting, bro. And I won't be long with this. I'll just say, like, It was kind of like, what you don't believe might be possible when you're still drinking, is the idea that quitting drinking isn't gonna be a feeling of something missing from your life. It's hard to imagine that being the case. For a lot of people, when they got an addiction like that, it's just like you're just trying to get your head around the idea that you're just gonna have to live without this thing now forever, and it's something that's missing, rather than, as a result of taking it out of the equation, your life starts to improve in loads and loads of ways.
Sure.
And you start to feel different, you start to feel better, you get clarity, you end up with like more energy, you end up like being able to handle situations better. Do you know what I mean? It's like an upward virtuous spiral in a way. And then you start to entertain the idea of putting that thing back into the equation, with all of the problems, so the booze, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And the feelings that I felt were ones of kind of like dread and real caution.
Fascinating.
So it's almost like, shit, I'm at the end of this year. Because I know what it feels like when you quit for a month and when you quit for 3 months,
Yeah.
And that's very different to when you've quit for 6 months or a year. So for most people, that's why I do encourage people that are interested in this to try and quit for like 1 year, because you don't quite get the benefits after 1 month. After 3 months, that's a little bit different, But for most people, it's like my good friend Kev Andrews, you know, one of the best guitarists on the island, like who's in Derby, so he quit drinking for a year off the back of a conversation that me and him had about what I'd done. So he quit last January the 1st, and he's in the middle of his year off. Do you know what I mean? And I've been chatting to him, and whatever Kev does is entirely his business, and it's up to him. And I don't know what he's going to do, but we've had conversations, and he understands what I'm saying. It's like, I see what you're saying. Do you know what I mean? Like, a point comes when a certain amount of time passes, when your interest in it is just gone. But it's more than just your interest is gone. Your entire feelings about it, your perception of it, how you relate to it is just totally transformed. And the prospect of it being a part of your life again, with all of the problems that it entailed, all of the negative consequences,
heartache,
everything that came with it, instead you start to feel a real repulsion to it. Do you know what I mean? So
wow. It's amazing how you said that. I think that's so important.
Yeah, man.
How you voice that is integral for people to listen to, and who you said are interested in it. How you vocalise that then kind of really inspired me in areas where I thought, maybe I don't need that. I think that's wonderful.
I'll quickly say there was a really great book, really funny, really light-hearted, really chill book called The Unexpected Joy of Being Sober. I think it's by somebody called Catherine Gray. And it was quite a popular book in, you know, Waterstones, whatever. It was flying off the shelves. And I did read that book. It wasn't the kind of book that I usually read, but I read that book. And this person who wrote this book, Catherine Gray, I think that's her name, I hope it is, but the book's called The Unexpected Joy of Being Sober. She was such a great writer, and she was so funny but honest, and she was really bearing all with her story of addiction. But she was really accurate. I was really inspired. At the time, I didn't know whether she was if it was true or not, because I was still an alcoholic. But she spoke about the benefits of quitting drinking and the transformation that one goes through, who, upon being somebody who drinks excessively, regularly, and then stopping, building towards a wise and healthy abstinence, and then how your body starts to change, your mind starts to change, your emotions start to change, your ability to control your emotions start to change, your relationships improve, your happiness, your sense of fulfillment, purpose, all of these things really start to shine, come to the surface, and your ability to achieve the things that you want to achieve increases massively as a result of that fact, alongside being able to make better decisions and everything else. Your life just transforms. Do you know what I mean? And I would say that obviously 2020 has been a bit of a swerve ball year. Do you know what I mean? I wasn't really expecting that twist in the tail. But my first year, man, it was a real delight. And I felt as though I'd managed to kind of like cultivate and resuscitate, if you like, a real thirst for my existence, a real commitment, thirst, kind of like appreciation and love for my existence that had started to kind of like wane and become a little bit damaged and battered and bruised and buried before. Do you know what I mean? So there we go. So yeah,
I'll try and piece this question together, because addiction's such a nuanced area and got so many avenues you could explore down. Like, I'm really into Russell Brand's teachings of sobriety, of abstinence-based recovery for people that have the addictive sort of brain. Yeah. I think there was an experiment done with rats. I don't know if you heard that one. Yeah.
Bruce Alexander.
Yeah, that's it.
I'll tell you about this.
And there was like 10% that shouldn't do drugs because they would literally consume, I think it was cocaine these rats were given, but the 10% would just keep doing it till death. Whereas there was a 90% that would know when to stop. So the addictive brain of these rats or mice was very similar, in which addict's brain is regulated with serotonin and dopamine, and when they have a substance. It's interesting because I love that Russell Brand perspective. I also love South Park. It's where my wisdom comes from, mate.
Yo, man, you don't get much better than that.
And they have this thought on discipline, and at the end, Stan's dad is like, Stan, I've got an illness, Stan. I can't stop drinking. And Stan says, right, you need to learn discipline, is basically the teaching at the end, because he's been practicing karate. So his dad said, I need to just stop altogether. And Stan says, no, that's not discipline. You need to be able to have bits and bobs in your life. There's two very different approaches there. Which one do you negate to more so, from Russell Brand to South Park?
Interesting, man. This is a great question, bro. I think there's a lot there. I don't know if the answer's simple. I think there's something really important about.
I never thought I'd ask that question.
It's a great question, bro. There's something really important about people understanding that we got a whole load of different needs, and in order for us to be able to overcome some of the addictions that we experience in our lives, we got to understand what it means to have our innate needs nourished, right? And I look at this from a holistic perspective. The way that I think about it is we've got, and this is a bit crass, but it's just simplified. I think about it in terms of like, we got our kind of like emotional, psychological needs. We got like social needs. We've got our needs. We've got needs to be in nature. We've got needs to have a strong sense of purpose and like spiritual needs, if you want to talk about them like this. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
In order for us to, if people's needs aren't being met, they're gonna be in pain. So there's like a perspective on addiction which is to do with self-medicating ultimately. So Gabor Mate will say, like, rather than the addiction, why the pain? Like, you got to understand the pain that leads to the addiction, right? People tend to engage in addictive processes in order to self-medicate largely. So we're looking for that dopamine, serotonin, oxytocin, like these hits. Yeah, do you know what I mean? There's an interesting study, it might be a different one, but so this is relevant, right? It's like, so I'm really keen on the perspective provided by somebody called Bruce Alexander. So Bruce Alexander, he put together, and quite a famous guy called Johann Hari, he's commented on it quite a lot. So he wrote a book called Chasing the Scream. Johann Hari wrote Chasing the Scream, which is about drugs and addiction and various related issues. But in that, he kind of refers to a famous rat park study where they got rats in a cage and they've got, I think it's like morphine, like heroin, water. And the rats in the cage, it's just a boring cage. It's the cage in itself is not contributing to the rats meeting their needs in any way. No, this is quite good, really good question. That's really relevant. I think it was either 1 or 2. I forget, but that's a relevant point. But because there's nothing else in this cage that ends up meeting their needs in any way, they literally just hammer this. I think it's morphine, right?
Right. Okay.
Until the bottle's empty. Yeah. But then, so it's developing this theory of like it contributed to this theory called the social connection theory of addiction, right? Which kind of like Johann Hari's he's done a great job of popularizing, because there's quite a famous TED talk where he says something like, the opposite of addiction isn't sobriety, the opposite of addiction is connection, right? And it lends itself to this sort of like understanding that in order to alleviate the pain that a lot of us feel, which lends itself to the addictions that we have, we've really got to understand the relevance of our connections within our lives, and whether that's connections in terms of our relationships with other people, our relationships to ourselves, our relationships to the natural environment. This idea that we are parts of a wider ecosystem, and this is where it's really interesting when you start thinking about what it means to be a human again. What does it mean to be this human animal? How have we evolved to live? What does it mean to be living naturally within our natural habitat in ways that we're, if we want to say, meant to live? Do you know what I mean? Well, it's not necessarily like this, right? And Bruce Alexander, what he does, he was an addiction specialist. So he's got the rats in the cage. A rat in a cage without the relationships that it needs, without anything else that it needs, none of its natural environment, just hammers this drug water, to put simple. And then he does another experiment where he gets a bigger cage, puts a load of other rats in it.
Created Utopia.
Yeah, Rat Utopia, Rat Park it was called. Okay. And then they're buzzing. Everybody's happy, man. They're bouncing about, they're doing their thing, they're nibbling on bits, they're playing with things, everything's cool. And then you've got these untouched, full bottles of drug water. Do you know what I mean?
And
so they're not interested.
And the normal water's just gone down.
Man.
Down. Okay.
They don't need it. Their needs are being nourished. And it just led to this sort of like, I know that's quite a kind of simple observation, and it's hardly like a rigorous scientific study, but it does lend itself to this perspective about like, it's not
what environment it is.
It's about the environment. Yeah. It's about that stuff there. And then he wrote a book called The Globalization of Addiction, and he basically says that addiction as a phenomena, as an issue, as a thing, it's actually relatively recent. Addiction isn't always present in human history. Okay. Experimenting with different substances is, but the idea of actually being addicted to something is very, very recent, man. And he says he did this, what is thought of as being a landmark study that led to this big book, The Globalization of Addiction. And he says that when you look at the historical development of society, there's a particular point that comes where we first start to see the rise of addiction. And that's when we see like capitalist society start to strip the land from underneath people's feet, have an impact upon their communities and their tribes and their clans and their, this idea that our natural sort of family structures and sort of community kinship and the ways in which we'd naturally been living in ways where we felt totally connected, like we had a strong sense of belonging, we felt a confident sense of being accepted by a particular group of people, whether that was family or community. Those things were present and in place, as well as people feeling as though they also had the opportunities needed to be autonomous, if you like. So have the ability to make choices for themselves. So he refers to it as like psychosocial integration, right? A community that doesn't have addiction needs to have the ability for people to psychologically and socially integrate. It's a part of our natural development as human beings. We need to have this freedom and autonomy, this ability to define who we are as people, pursue our own goals, lead relatively free lives where we can make choices and determine the future for ourselves, whilst also simultaneously having the support of our tribe and support of our crew.
Yeah.
When these things are start to disappear or we feel insecure, he calls it dislocation, right? The process of dislocation, which is basically just kind of like having our access to the things that we need, the people we need, the opportunities that we need. When they're affected and they're taken from us, that's when we start to feel that deep sense of stress and pain that lends itself to us wanting to repeatedly abuse particular substances in order to feel that sense of self-medication and that sort of thing. It's a fascinating field, but I'm more from that sort of perspective. I think it's really important that we look at the environment.
It's the best way of answering a question ever.
Sorry, bro, I'm so long-winded, man.
It's interesting with that and with sobriety, or like where you've managed to say no to alcohol. What about people that are addicted to things like sex and food? Do you know, things where they've got to encounter it every day, really? Well, not sex.
All
right, Jones, you don't look at me like that.
Lucky for some.
It's nice, isn't it?
Lucky for some.
Let's go food then. Or when you're with a partner, though, and say, because sex is a big one for me. I have a sexual addiction, I would say, a self-medicated, and been prescribed by other people. But, you know, I've got a partner now. I love my partner. We've had great discussions and we've aligned ourselves accordingly to what works best for us, which is working well. But also, you know, she wants to have sex when we're feeling it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Then things that you would like to have in your life, how do people deal with that? Especially food, because that is an important one.
Well, it's really interesting, man. I mean, I think when it comes to the sort of like sex addictions, or even we were chatting about it in the van, like people, it's totally relevant to what we're talking about in the van. People in our lives that might be quite demanding on us or needy, that can be viewed as an addiction. You know, when Gabor Mate talks about addiction, he says that anything could become a target of addiction. Yeah. So Gabor Mate, it seems like an odd example. He talks about how he had an addiction to buying classical music CDs. It was a genuine addiction. It was a concern. It started to have a detrimental impact upon his life. Right. Okay. And he identified the root of it being highly stressful environments that he was a baby in, you know, where he was traumatized as a small child, as a baby, and he would be soothed by having the sounds of classical music played. And it led to a really problematic addiction later in life. So we can actually become addicted to anything. That's important to look at. Obviously, when it comes to things like sex addictions or relationship, anything to do with other people, obviously, you know, other human beings, it brings into it a whole other layer of like ethics and issues to do with like consent and to do with boundaries and all of these different things, and making sure that we're kind of like cultivating those parts of ourselves that totally honor, revere, respect, support, advocate, and promote other people's boundaries and kind of like values and needs and these sorts of things, which are really easy for people to step over. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know how often I heard the word boundaries within the context of understanding people's subjective morals or kind of like lines that they draw surrounding how they insist upon being treated. I didn't hear the word boundaries probably at all growing up. It wasn't a term that my father used when he was talking to me about other people. It wasn't something that teachers were talking about. It wasn't something that I was encouraged to consider for myself. Yeah. And so, of course, I had this idea of like morals and ethics and treating people the way that you want to be treated and all of these things, which in itself, like, we shouldn't necessarily treat people the way that we want to be treated. We should treat people the way that they want to be treated. Do you know what I mean? But it's an interesting thing that's missing.
Past the golden rule.
Exactly. It's beyond that. It's platinum rule or whatever it is. But it's like, but upon, again, not having our needs nourished, then we can start to relate to people in ways that are kind of distorted and clouded by the cravings that we have and, you know, our own needs. You know, if somebody's in deep pain and that they're seeing, and I'm talking about a very different context to the one that you presented regarding yourself, obviously. Do you know what I'm saying? Yeah. Then people can find themselves like becoming abusive or harassing people or whatever it is, these sorts of things. And they're really, really serious. People have got to kind of work out And it's this thing that I've been exploring and researching. The more that we can nourish ourselves, the more that we can kind of take care of find ways of having our holistic health needs met. There's things that we can do for ourselves to do with, and we hopefully will move in this direction a little bit, to do with the kind of pillars of our own health, if you like. And to keep that simply, let's focus on, you're on about food. So the more that we nourish ourselves with nutrition, the less that we experience these cravings to self-medicate the pain that we feel in other ways, right? That's one thing. There's a really interesting and important perspective called the wellness recovery connection, which is understanding that if we're depleted as people, if we're not rested, if we don't move adequately, if we're not getting enough exercise, if we're not nourishing our body with the nutrients that our body needs, then some of these cravings or this pain that we're talking about, those experiences of it, those feelings of it, they can be really accentuated. That is a common truth that not many people are aware of, and the recovery community, it doesn't always deal with particularly well, right? There's a great project in Derby that I'm a part of called Stay Well, and we deal with these things in that with Stay Well. But it's understanding that in order for us to be able to better regulate our behaviour in relation to our different sort of like needs and cravings and things like that, we have to be nourished. We really, really have to be nourished. Food addiction is an interesting thing, man, because, and this is where the kind of like the social perspective, the political perspective is so important, because we've got like a toxic food industry that has purposefully pumped sugar into the vast bulk of all of the foodstuffs that surround us, that it almost makes it impossible for people to avoid addictive substances in their food. And people have to work really, really hard in order to have healthy diets and things like that. It's almost like quite a privileged thing to be able to have like a healthy diet. Not everybody has got access to like, you know, an organic grocer's down the road, or not everybody has been raised to understand how to prepare whole food or whatever it is. It's a really important thing, but the vast majority of people on this island have a sugar addiction. And it's one of the hardest things that people struggle to overcome and quit. There are things that we can do. Like, it's really interesting. I'll just quickly touch upon this, man, because it's fascinating to me. So it's something that we kind of like specialize in at Praxis Probiotics, is understanding sort of the importance of the microbiome, which is deemed to be our kind of latest sort of discovered organ in the body, and understanding the central role that that has in so many of our kind of functioning as human beings. And one thing that has been discovered about the microbiome is that it can contribute significantly to like food cravings and addictions and things like that. People have often heard about the idea that we've got good bacteria and bad bacteria and that kind of thing, but maybe don't know much more than that. But what is fascinating is that we've got 100 trillion of these bacteria or microorganisms in our gut. They're a mixture of kind of like, largely they're bacteria, but we've got some yeasts and other bits and bobs in there. But when we have some of these more harmful foodstuffs like sugars, breads, pastries, heavily processed foods and things like this, they can that food can feed, these sugars particularly feed these really quite harmful yeasts. So these living yeasts in the gut. And then they grow and they multiply, right? So you consume the sugar, and then these harmful yeasts that you don't really want any of, you don't want many of at all. Ideally, they're totally overcrowded by the good bacteria. They start to multiply and grow, and that can cause major problems down the line. But they also send signals to the brain which make us go and find the candy floss.
Right. That makes total sense.
Because it's like this idea that
it wants to grow.
Yeah, well, it wants to grow, it wants to live, it wants to multiply,
right, yeah.
But it also wants to be fed. It wants to be fed, and its favourite food stuff are these more harmful foods, including sugars and like and things like gluten, high carbs, things like that, things in pasta and bread and dough and that sort of stuff. Do you know what I mean? So there's an interesting link that people are focusing on more when it comes to food addiction, to do with the relevance of gut health and trying to make sure that we reduce the amount of the harmful yeasts that exist within our guts, because they actually, through the gut-brain axis, so there's like a nerve, the vagus nerve between the gut and the brain, where there's two-way communication. There's communication from the brain to the gut.
I've heard of the gut brain.
Yeah, that's it. So you got it. So people refer to it as the gut brain axis. There's lots of research about it, and it's showing us that increasingly how we think and how we feel is controlled by the bacteria that live in our guts. There's a book that was written called The Psychobiotic Revolution. What that shows us in that book, based on all of the research that it's done, well, first of all, that like 95% of all of our serotonin, you know, key sort of happy hormone, happy chemical, is actually not produced by the brain at all. Despite what we'd believed for decades and decades, we believed that all of our serotonin was produced in the brain, but actually 95% of it is produced in the gut by these bacteria. So you feed them your broccoli and your carrot and whatever else it is that you're about, and the happy one, the good ones that we want, these are not just good. People refer to them as friendly bacteria. They ain't friendly. They're essential. If they're not there, we die. Like, they are responsible for the vast bulk of all of our functions. There's 100 trillion of them. 100 trillion of them. And what that means is that we are actually only 10% human. We're 10% human because our microorganisms in our gut, they outnumber our human cells 10 to 1.
Right, okay.
So we're like a super organism that's part human with our human cells, and then largely bacteria, 100 trillion of which exist within our digestive tracts and within our gut. They break down all of the different foods that we consume. They metabolize and process the different nutrients that we need to see, to move, to smell, to do everything that we need to do to survive. Do you know what I mean? And without them, we can't live. So that's why there's so much emphasis these days put upon the importance of the microbiome. The microbiome also, so all of these gut bacteria, they're totally responsible for regulating the immune system as well. And that's why, you know, it's been very kind of like relevant, the stuff that we've been doing during this difficult time as well. Because 70 to 80% of the immune system is located in the gut, and it's actually regulated by the microbiome. There's loads about the microbiome in these gut bacteria, which we're only just starting to discover for the first time. One of them, just to take it back to where we were, was the idea that they actually control our cravings. They can control it's like we're puppets that are being controlled by all of these different yeasts and bacterias. And if they want us to eat something, they will send signals to our brain to make us go searching for it in the cupboards. And I think it's like, again, it's another piece that's missing from a lot of our puzzles to do with what we believe to be true about health, addiction, wellness, and all of these different things, man. So
fascinating. Like, it reminds me of David Attenborough, but there's a parasite that wants to exist, but it can only exist in a bird of a temperature. So it was making this fish suicidal, so it'd swim up to the top and get eaten by this bird, and it could live in the bird. But that feels like what you've just described.
That's amazing, bro. That's amazing. It's really bizarre. It's really fascinating. It's really important.
And you're getting these healthy things. Would you say plant-based then? Is that? I've been listening to a podcast recently, and again, it's this plant as medicine, but not always necessarily as food. And this guy, but his perspective was plants actually don't want to be eaten a lot of the time. This is only off a podcast I was listening to, and I can hear your perspective then.
Yeah.
But he, Dr. Phil Salandino, awesome guy. But he really respects plants on the holistic and medicine's point of view. But again, they're an organism that's been in the ground. They haven't got a survival mechanism of being able to run away from predators and things like that. So to deter bugs, he believes that they have grown toxicities within them that are quite poisonous in large quantities to human. But he thinks they do have medicinal purpose. Would you say that, from what I've listened to, would you go on the other side of the grain and say, no, they're really healthy for you and good for the biome?
Plants generally Any specific plants?
Well,
or
he just
all
said,
plants?
in general, nearly all plants have toxicity in them to deter from being eaten. They don't want to be eaten.
Yeah.
Whereas, like, other like sources of which you can root from, say animal, not that it wants to, but it hasn't built that mechanism over evolution.
Sure.
That's a podcast I've been listening to.
Yeah,
and when
man.
you were talking, that was all it
cool.
was reflecting in my head, was like, I've had this information here.
That's good.
But I'm really excited to hear the opposite side of the fence.
That's great,
or what
man.
somebody else thinks.
I love it.
Yeah.
Well, I mean,
I'm open.
I don't know, man. Like, I'm totally open to these new kind of discoveries and the way in which the field itself is kind of like nuanced. It's really nuanced, and there's lots of considerations. I feel like the field of nutrition generally, and sort of human health, it's shrouded with a lot of confusion, a lot of controversy, and a lot of debate. And I try and think of...
Definitely. You listen to them, and they're I love this metaphor the other day, but like holding our opinions like the way we have our clothes, so like wear them like that. They can come off, they can be swapped, they can be shared, and all that.
Yeah, man.
Not like your skin. It doesn't have to be so regimented to you.
Totally.
And this guy, the reason I navigated to him was because he was holding himself. It wasn't his ego talking, whereas people were attacking him and being quite nasty and aggressive towards it. He was just like, this is part what I've studied and experienced, and we've done epidemiology and learnt tests through this. Here's what we've learnt now. And people were like, no, this is how I think though, and stop saying that. And that's why I went that way. But
yeah, totally. I love it, man. I really enjoy kind of like discussions and debates surrounding nutrition. Like, I'm not a nutritional therapist, nothing like that. But I do spend a lot of time with one, and that's my dear friend Lucy Kay, who I work with Praxis Probiotics, and we've run a lot of workshops in the community to do with like gut health and understanding probiotics and the microbiome and the role that the microbiome plays in optimal health and overall health. Like, people are talking increasingly about how the gut is at the root of all health. All health begins in the gut, all disease begins in the gut as well. Hippocrates was saying that.
And he was talking in that light too.
Yeah, man. Yeah. Big up. So to answer the question though, I guess my understanding has always been that one of the best things that we can do for our microbiome, for the gut bacteria that live in our guts, which is something that we should all be interested in, because it does literally have an impact on every other aspect of our sense of health and wellness, is increase the amount of fiber that we consume, ideally largely from plants, in the form of vegetables, followed by, fruits, nuts and seeds. We don't need too much fruit in our diets, but considering the state of most people's diets, it's probably a good direction to increase the amount of fruit that you consume, being mindful of the fact that the sugars are not necessarily a major problem because they're natural sugars. However, we don't want too much natural sugar and things like that. But we don't have enough plants in our diet, vegetables in our diet, seeds in our diet, and that sort of thing. Within that context, though, your friend's perspective can coexist. I'm confident, just because that is a conclusion that has been arrived at largely within the field of microbiome research. It doesn't mean that the toxicity that your man's pointing at isn't true or doesn't exist. It might mean that for whatever reason we are able to accommodate that, compensate for that, deal with that, process that, detoxify it, or whatever it is. I don't know. I'm sure that he does.
No, that's it.
But
send you it through, and then you can have agendas.
But what I find interesting on a quick one, because I do like these conversations, is like I think the work of a guy called Weston Price is interesting. He's a guy who was like a dentist who in the 20s, he did quite a landmark study. I'm sure that it's been criticised and held up as being flawed since then for various reasons, but it's the principles of it that I find interesting. And his principle, it's about the approach and the principle. So it's not necessarily the most rigorous scientific study, but what he did was, and this is what I find interesting, is that he basically went all over the world and he just tried to learn about what people's natural diets were, like how had different people in different parts of the world evolved to eat. Yeah.
Yeah.
And what's interesting about it is there's not like a one size fits all diet that you can hold up and say, this is the epitome of the healthiest possible diet. We can point to like the Mediterranean diet and we can say things like there's certain principles that we can learn from about the Mediterranean diet. You know what I mean? The use of certain oils, the use of the general ratio of like vegetables to, you know, grains or whatever it is. Or we can look at like a South Asian diet or whatever it is. But it's interesting to me, the idea that if you've got an entire community of people where their ancestors and their ancestors and their ancestors are generally evolved within a particular geographical location, where certain things were available and certain things weren't, then those people, what is the optimal diet for them is most likely going to be those things.
So
and if you were to take
what your ancestor is,
potentially, there's an interesting perspective here.
I've
You
heard
take
it.
some of those people and then you fly them to the other side of the world, and then you give them the diet that is healthiest for those people there, like in Iceland or, you know, in the southern states of America or whatever. Those diets might be healthy for those people that live there, but for those people that have just been flown there and then given it, their microbiome has evolved to expect and thrive on different foods, basically. Do you know what I mean? Like there's tribes and stuff like this where they live off like goat's milk and drinking blood, and then that's it pretty much, apart from the odd berry. You know what I mean? And then you've got like the Hadza tribe, I think from Tanzania. So quickly with microbiome, people talk about you want to have the healthiest microbiome is the one that's got the most diverse species in it, right? So you've got loads of different species. And the Hadza tribe in Tanzania, that are deemed to be one of the only sole remaining hunter-gatherer tribes still on the planet, they've got, I think it might be slightly off the mark, but it's around about something like 1,700 or 1,600 or 1,800 like different species.
This is what the podcast was based off of as well, talking through this.
Oh, good. Well, this is really, really interesting then. Like, you know, these are people that still, they lead a very, very, very natural existence. They're very healthy people because they're living in the ways that they have kind of like evolved to live. It doesn't mean that they don't have certain health issues, and it doesn't mean there are certain changes that we've made in our society that they might not benefit from. But what it does mean is they're leading a life that they've evolved to lead, where they're largely moving around. They're not static or sedentary for too long. And they're largely consuming raw foods, berries, fruits, vegetables, and bits of meat. Rarely that they hunt.
Would you say rarely? Because their perspective was where the carnivore diet nearly came from.
Okay.
Because they go, it's called nose to tail. And they go through all of the organs,
the whole thing.
all the offal, everything.
Totally.
Nothing goes to waste.
Absolutely.
But that's where all the nutrients, vitamins and minerals are coming from.
Yeah.
Their perspective was mainly animals, and where the carnivore diet and carnivore code was built from, apparently.
Interesting. Well, it might be true then, bro. I could be off the mark with that. But if that is the case,
just what I've heard.
no, it may well be accurate. I guess the Hadza tribe is always held up because it's like, well, for many reasons, but it's I guess it's deemed to be one of the few remaining sort of like hunter-gatherer tribes that exist. But that is an interesting point in the sense that I think that it would show us that there are different tribes or different peoples all over the world that have rolled differently, and that's maybe the point I'm getting at. The kind of idea that for many, if I'm accurate and I might be wrong, largely, at least in many cultures, meat has been a part of, or animal protein has been a part of almost every single culture across the globe to some degree or another, which is interesting. In terms of how we've evolved to eat, right? Some much less so, and some maybe much more. Do you know what I mean? Depending. I know, for example, like Eskimos might eat like a significantly higher amount of like fat and blubber and that sort of thing than, you know, a community in Denmark, for example, or whatever it might be. But to me, what is really interesting when we talk about diet is understanding the specifics and the nuances and the kind of idea that there isn't really a one size fits all diet, but that can like really, what's the right word for this? Like, it can really disempower people, or I was going to say cripple people, but that won't be the best word to use, like disable people. Like it can stop people, it can really prevent people from making progress with trying to make improvements with their diets. And what can be useful is to give general principles, and based on what we know is good for the microbiome and for people generally, maybe in contrast to what your man's saying, like, we would all benefit from eating more vegetables is certainly where I believe I'm at with this.
That's awesome.
It doesn't mean it's got to be solely. Because we do know that organic meat and other animal protein, it can actually be good for human health. Hence why a lot of people might feel that they've got to have things like eggs in their diet or small amounts of meat. For some people, other people might think or choose or know for themselves that they have to have quite a lot of meat. I don't know. I'm not that person, fortunately for me. Do you know what I mean? I used to be, but I'm not anymore.
It's good for people with diet or nutrition, to trial and error and see what is working for them, because I think you get a good response from gut, don't you? I'm celiac, and I've had for a long time ailments and problems with gut health and really struggled.
Have you?
Yeah, it's been horrible, like rashy, bloated, feel sick, feel lethargic, all these things that you can probably equate to and people have given you in the past, told you about when they've been struggling with their gut. And that was one for me. I'd not heard that perspective before. I was fascinated for the whole podcast. I think it was on a Rogan as well. Was it? And I was listening in. I thought, I'm going to implement it, just give it a go and try a part of what he said. And just, again, it's like an exclusion diet, just taking things out. Yeah. And the fact I'm not at tip-top shape, tip-top form, but I feel the best I've ever felt.
You're looking good, man.
Legitimately and genuinely feel good. So
that's great. That's
great. I think, do that for a while, but then with probiotics, maybe speak to you after this, get a sample of some stuff.
Yeah, no doubt.
Try and include and add things back in, and then see what works even more so.
I think that's great.
I think that's the way people could be.
I think it's cool, man. If people are open to this, like just experimenting with things, I think that's like a really wise way. I think for me, it's really important that I chat to Lucy quite a lot, my nutritional therapist friend, and Dina as well, Dina Smiles, who I work with. Yeah. There's a real difference when we're talking about trying to support people and empower people and encourage people to make various changes in their life. It's really important that we understand the difference between the knowledge that we have to share and just kind of like advice, suggestions and wisdom that we might have that is about how to go about it. And having the knowledge of how to do something, it's not enough to help people feel motivated and feel empowered and things like this. There's been so many times in the past, I've worked with a lot of people since my parents died that have got cancer, and supporting people make choices to do with natural treatments and natural protocols and what are deemed to be anti-cancer diets and things like this that they've shown an interest in. They've shown an interest in it, and I'm sharing what I have learned. And they're making their choices. But the most valuable kind of like conversations that occur are more to do with little bits of like tips and advice about how to stay motivated, or like how to not get overwhelmed, or the importance of not getting bogged down by getting it perfect, or kind of like not beating yourself up if you break a promise to yourself or whatever it is, you know what I mean? Because we're dealing with like people, and we're dealing with people's motivation, and we're dealing with people's kind of habits, and we're dealing with people's kind of like sense of ability to achieve and that sort of thing. And it's a really difficult thing when we're looking at things like diet. I think that whenever it comes to any sort of like human habit, especially when there's so many challenges surrounding people, for so many people, they might be time poor, they might have grown up in a way where they've got their relationship with food might not be the most empowered, or they're just kind of totally daunted or intimidated by any kind of changes whatsoever that they might want to make. and they just feel totally out of their depth with it. And there's a lot of people out there that really struggle with food, and I'm one of them. And I'm a very privileged, kind of like knowledgeable in some areas, and kind of empowered breeder, but I'm still making difficult choices. I'm still making poor choices on a regular basis. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think for me, one of the most important things that I've like tried to cultivate is just a real kind of helpful mindset and outlook on it. It's about attitude and outlook and stuff like that.
I think
Do you
that's
know what I mean?
what you've said again. I do like you said, there is a big nuance perspective with this, and there is no right or wrong necessarily. You've just got paths to try and avenues. But what you're saying, go with the approach of changing the attitude, changing the mindsets, maybe like learning to tweak bits and bobs, take a bit of sugar out, see how you feel, take the caffeine away, see what you feel like, and going off of gut, going off of like that true energy levels and things like that. You can be honest with yourself on that perspective.
Yeah,
I think it's good to see us like an experiment.
Yeah, definitely,
your body,
man.
In that way.
Definitely, man. And I think, on a quick one with this stuff as well, it's like, for some people, they might benefit from just doing loads of exercise. That's the thing that feels most comfortable with them. Yeah, they feel like they can do that. They feel like, I'm just going to really focus on this because they're really struggling with their sugar addiction or whatever it is. So they just start doing the thing that they feel that they're most able to do.
Yeah.
Get some simple wins. You know what I mean?
Saying, yeah.
Build your motivation. Like have some like important, quite easy victories and stuff like that. Then things that you find a bit more challenging, just take it easy, one step at a time, and that sort of thing. For other people, they might find it really difficult to get the motivation needed to go for a jog or do any yoga or do any movement or whatever. And they might benefit from just identifying ways where they might end up. And Dr. Chatterjee is really good with this. A guy called Rangan Chatterjee, who wrote some best-selling books to do with like the 4-pillar plan and the stress solution and stuff like this, where he just talks about the importance of gentle movement. Like, if you are somebody that's put off by exercise and the thought of going to the gym or going to a yoga class or whatever it is there a way that you might just, I don't know, maybe park your car a little bit further away from where your office is, just so that you got to just do a few more steps.
Mindsets and
you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But it's also like changing your habits and your routine.
That's it.
So you just got to do a little bit more movement or whatever it is. Or some people, they might find intermittent fasting a lot more achievable because it entails
just experimenting with again.
Not
it really is working.
Exactly, man.
Really
and
is.
I think that's a really good idea for people to just at least have a look at and have a crack at, because all it means is that you just don't eat between this time and this time, but it's not deprivation. It's totally natural.
That was said recently was intent. I just love that word. Like, go with intent into who you are and your diet, but like having them achievable tasks. And the intermittent fasting one for me was like, right, I'm always grazing or eating little bits when I don't need to be. So I'm just going to not eat till 12 o'clock or 1 o'clock. That's my intent, going with that. And then I finish at 8. I've got a goal there, and I've been hitting it, and it feels really good from that, just going in with that intent.
That's
Have you
big.
Experienced a similar thing?
Yeah, totally, man. Like so the year when I first did my year of sobriety, as a part of this sort of like what I built up in my head as being like a research project, like treating myself as a guinea pig, which is what I did. Like I made lots of quite big changes in various different levels of my health. My approach was my health and well-being. And I experimented with a variety of different diets and things like that. I did keto diet for a little bit. I was kind of dabbling with just trying to increase the diversity of different foods, the whole foods that I was eating and things like this. I went sugar-free. I was just doing all sorts of bits. And I think that, there's something really important about just kind of like being easy on yourself, like going easy with yourself, but setting yourself challenges. If you like the idea of setting yourself challenges, if whatever resonates with you, if you're a goal setter, set goals. If you're more about intentions, then have positive intentions, think about it. If you're about visualization, visualize it. Do you know what I mean? But whatever it is, just try and make sure that it's something that makes you feel good,
That's cool.
excited, positive. You don't feel like you're going to beat yourself up. You know what I mean? The fact that you're even trying to make positive changes in your life is the most important thing. Like, everybody deserves a round of applause for just giving a shit and wanting to improve their existence. Like that's fantastic in itself. And just that is obviously coming from a place of positive intention. You want better for yourself, and that's a really, really fantastic place to be. But don't underestimate yourself either. Like, you have the potential and the capacity to make drastic, radical, significant, really kind of empowering, nourishing, profound changes. Maybe not all at once, and maybe not all this year. Do you know what I mean? And for me, it's that thing as well. Like, there's times when I get into this mindset of like, right then, I'm going to step up. I'm going to rise to this challenge. I'm going to make this month be a month where I go hardcore on like meditation, and kind of want to do some barefoot running. I'm going to go swimming. I'm going to kind of like do loads of stuff in the community. I'm going to plan this big event and blah, 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 right? And I end up visualizing this big thing. And I very rarely achieve it all, right? I aim for the stars and I land on the moon, and I'm happy with that. Do you get me?
Cool.
But I take the pressure off myself from the word go. I don't feel like, oh, this has got to happen. I just feel like, yo, man, enjoy
your attitude towards that.
Like, enjoy the idea that you've got an imagination. As a human being, you've got the capacity to actually think big. You have the ability, and that's creative thinking in itself, you know, to project into the future. Enjoy thinking about possibilities and visualizing a better world or a better community or a better life. And whatever you end up then going on to do with others or whatever, it just is what it is. You can reflect on it, you can learn from it, and then you can make new plans, you can have new intentions, whatever. But one of the most disempowering and saddest things is when people are kind of beating themselves up about things. We get enough, our self-esteem is chipped at enough from advertisements, big corporations, politicians are trying to gaslight us all of the time. There's no need for us to be doing it to ourselves as well. Do you know what I mean? And each other. So we've got to be gentle with ourselves and compassionate towards ourselves and supportive of ourselves. It's all good.
It's a great spin that I'd not really heard before, because again, people go this way or this way. So say New Year's coming up, everyone has a resolution, and you can get people go, oh, I'm going to make all these resolutions and do all this, and by the end of January, because they haven't started to implement them, they're like fall off the radar and they don't have anything. Then they're like sod it. But then you get people say, well, don't do that, don't bother doing any. And I think that perspective, or they say, oh, just do tiny steps. Well, that's a spin I've never heard, where it's like, yeah, go for it, do whatever makes you feel good, whatever makes you feel comfortable, but just don't have too much of an expectation on that. And like you say, aim for the stars, land on the moon. What a beautiful attitude that is, because you can do as much as you want, but if you don't achieve it all, just be proud of what you do.
Totally, bro.
And that's a great attitude.
Respect. And on a quick tip, man, because I can scare people with my lists, right? I'm a man of lists, and that can really intimidate people that hate lists. But I've had chats with people about like I have like weekly to-do lists, but they're not really to-do lists. They're kind of like possibility lists. They're more like every single Sunday I'll set myself like things that I could do in the week ahead to do with the different goals that I'm working towards. So I've got like, I've got like these little gridded pads that I enjoy, these little pucker pads.
Wicked.
And I've got like, I'll set 15 goals if you like, but it's this thing, it's not really a goal. It's just like a possibility. It's something that I could be doing. It's something that I know that I want to do, but it doesn't matter if it doesn't get done. It is just what it is. Yeah. So I've got like, my Praxis Probiotic goals. I've got my holistic health goals, my social solidarity goals that are set to do with my relationships with my friends and my people. I've got my book goals. I'm training to be a therapist as well, so I've got those goals.
I'll be coming.
I've got like goals to do with creative writing, goals to do with being like an ethical consumer and an activist and all these different things. And I just think of things that I could do, right? And the truth is, man, even if I go through the whole week and I don't cross off a single thing, it doesn't matter. But kind of what does matter is the idea that I just put a bit of time aside at the start of the week to reconnect with what I'm about and reconnect with some of the things that I would like to do. And just by putting my mind in that place where I'm actually thinking about what I would like to achieve, writing them down as possible as intentions and possible actions and things like that, even if I just threw that under the bed, man, and just didn't look at it again, it's like a process of visualization in itself. Just the fact that you're even acquainting yourself with that place, and then you're embarking upon the week from that space. The decisions that you make and the kind of general outlook and the kind of moves, the directions that you're moving in are more likely going to be in those directions. And you're going to have, a more positive time potentially for me. This ain't for everybody, but for me, than if I don't bother doing it at all.
Yeah.
For some people, it's probably in their best interest that they don't bother doing it at all, and that's absolutely fine. You work out your own way. You know what I'm saying?
What a beautiful attitude, man. I feel this podcast would and could be infinite because we can go on everywhere. I upload to Spreaker, which I think only let me have 2.5 hours.
Okay.
Or I get to a certain file size. So we've got about 15 minutes left.
All right, bro.
Now, like, what are some of your most important factors in your life at the minute then? Is it probiotics? Is that what you're really trying to push forward, or are you trying to bring people together again, like Thrive and all these great days, man?
I appreciate this, bro. I appreciate the 15 minutes heads up as well. Like, on a level, I do want to say that for all of us, you know, like, many people have gone through a really difficult year this year, and regardless of this year, like, generally, it's never been more important that we try and work out ways for us to be pulling together, to be trying to care for each other and ourselves, to be supporting each other, to be rebuilding our relationships, to be finding common ground, to be working out the types of worlds that we want to be living in, the type of worlds that we want to be raising our children in, and really thinking about how we go about making sure that we can actually survive and thrive within the various different crises that we're currently facing as a species. And I think that these types of questions and these sorts of perspectives, they're not negative, they're not doom-mongering, they're facing and confronting reality head on, right? We are in the middle of a 6th mass extinction event, potentially, right? Species are dying off at a rapid rate as a result of the way that we organise our society with industrial capitalism and some of the various different processes that dominate our society. I would like to believe that the old world is dying and new worlds are being born, and we're all a part of that birthing process. I believe that now is the most important time that we'll ever have, the greatest opportunity that we'll ever have to create the kind of changes that not only we want, but we absolutely need. We have got to build a society together which is more than just sustainable. It's got to be regenerative. It's got to be one that gives life and that prioritizes our needs and the needs of all life. And these are things that we can do. We've got all of the knowledges that we need. We've got all of the tools that we need. We've got everything that we need within ourselves and within each other. We don't need the powers that be gaslighting us, manipulating us, exploiting us, abusing us, left, right and centre. We need to be looking to the new solutions that we're aware of to be implementing so that we can actually create and lead these sort of like fulfilling, meaningful, purposeful existences where all of our needs are met. And that's the big challenge, I believe, for all of us, right? For all of us, in whatever way makes sense to us all. Do you know what I mean? And that can be using whatever skills we got, whatever motivations, whatever our hobbies and our interests are. The general ways in which we want to lead our lives with the values that we have, whether that's being parents, friends, community members, artists, makers, plumbers, electricians, whatever it is, teachers, nurses, whatever it is that we want to do with our lives, we can do those things, but we need to do those things in ways that are channeling our energies towards creating this new world. And that's what I want to be kind of trying to focus on as a general outlook. I know that wasn't very specific, but it's this idea that the things
got me ready.
Good. You've been ready for a while, man. Yeah. You better be ready. You need to get ready.
I'm on the cusp of it, man. I'm just like, Praxis, tell me what to do and where to do it. I'm going. I'm in. Beautiful.
Well, this is a beautiful thing, man. And like, we know what's going down. And if we don't, then we can ask questions. And I think that there's a few things that are more powerful than the question. Do you know what I mean? It's a beautiful thing that defines encounters like this. The idea that we ask questions, we show an interest in each other. We rebuild our connections with each other. We learn from each other. And I think there's something for me that's so important about the power of the question. Yeah. Whatever it is that we want to know, we need to be asking so that we can find out the answers, because all of the answers do exist within us. For me, I'll wrap this up by saying, you know, on a level, in terms of responding to your question, bro, like with Praxis Probiotics, we want to be kind of building our workers cooperative. Okay. So we're a decentralized, leaderless, democratic workers cooperative. We've got no bosses. We've got everybody's paid the same. we're all trying to create a work environment where everybody's got as much freedom and say as possible, whilst we're working towards our aims of trying to create a kind of more nourished, connected and free world where people's holistic health needs are met. When we say holistic health, we're also referring to the health of the entire planet, the health of the entire ecosystem, the health of everybody in our community, not just individual health, but holistic health, the whole deal, the whole picture. And that's why we do the work that we do, making the probiotics that we make and doing it in sustainable ways. We're growing our own food. And we're doing it in ways that are good for the environment, and we have volunteer projects so people can get involved in that stuff as well. We're trying to work out how we can continue to spread the word, do workshops, do retreats, do all of these different things. But a part of that puzzle, a project of Praxis Probiotics, which we've been doing for a few years now, we're going to relaunch it in March 2021, and that is what has been known up to this point as Thrive, but it's going to be relaunched and rebranded as Thrive Together. And that will be basically like a kind of empowerment events collective where anybody in the community is free to get involved and run workshops, courses, sessions, treatments, podcasts, interviews, whatever it is that they're passionate about, because that's what we want. We want people to have opportunities to fulfill their passions in whatever way that they want. So Thrive Together will be focusing on that stuff. I'm going to be writing a book which is to do with all of these different bits and bobs. We're going to be partnering with a really important project in Derby called the Stay Well Centre. I won't go on. I know we've got a few.
Mate, I'm really enjoying it. I'm literally really enjoying it.
So we're going to be running, so that's an amazing project, man. I feel really blessed to be working with various people there, especially within the context of COVID-19, lockdown that's just occurred, all of the different social impacts that we're going to be having to deal with. When I think about recovery, I start on this journey talking about recovery from trauma, recovery from addiction, and then I zoom out and I think about our entire community needs to recover. We need to recover from COVID. We need to recover from the lockdown measures that have had a negative impact upon people. We need to recover from isolation, poverty, all of the problems to do with the health crisis and all of these different things. And then we zoom out even further and it's like the entire species needs to recover from the impact that has been had upon us over, thousands and thousands of years, to do with the way that we've organised society in ways that do not meet our needs. And that's why we've got this opportunity now to transcend the old world and build the new world like together. Do you know what I'm saying? So just anything that we can do together. I'm going to play my very, very humble part in all of that. I appreciate that's a very grandiose ambition, but that's where we're at as far as I'm concerned.
I've had the most natural come up of my life on this side of the desk. I've just been like, we're having it, we're doing it. A couple of the great things you said, like, I love the thing about curiosity. I think questions are better than answers at the minute. We need to really question. We don't need to know it all. We don't need to have the answer for everything, but we need to be able to ask them questions and have these conversations. So I can't thank you enough for being on here and giving that energy, bringing that vibe, and being on this bus and filling it with me, because I want to go out now and just ask them questions and say what we're going to do.
Yes.
I'll be a part of it, man. I'm a part of this move. I'm on your train, dude.
Bless you,
You're
bro.
on my bus, I'm on your train.
Yo, man, that's amazing, man. We've got to get the train off the tracks.
Yeah. Brother, where can people find you then? Where can people go and join the movement?
Wicked. By the time that people are listening to this, we would have literally just launched our brand spanking new website for praxisprobiotics.com. That's praxisprobiotics.com. We've got a Facebook page.
You've spoken on this podcast. Make sure you get that in, guys.
Check that out, man. That'll be enough for now, I think.
Wonderful. Well, guys, again, thank you so much for being a part of the Old Farm Bus Back of the Bus Sessions podcast. I really, truly do hope you go and check out these guys, because they're making a move, and that's what we need more than ever right now. Connection, coming together and loving one another. So be nice to one another, you beautiful buggers. Have a good day.
Bless you. Amazing.